Thomas, an enthusiastic amateur photographer, had always dreamed of traveling to the mysterious Aokigahara, known as the Suicide Forest, which lies at the foot of Mount Fuji in Japan. He had read many stories about people who entered this forest and never returned, disappearing without a trace among the densely packed trees and the gloom of the fog. Thomas did not believe in the supernatural. He thought that his determination and professional equipment would help him avoid such a fate. Upon arrival, he began his journey at dawn, equipped with cameras and a GPS tracker. The forest welcomed him with the quiet rustle of leaves and the coolness of tree shadows. Initially, everything went well, and Thomas captured unique shots on his camera: twisted trees, moss-covered stones, and the impenetrable depth of the forest. However, by midday, as he made his way through increasingly dense thickets, Thomas noticed that his electronic devices started behaving strangely. The GPS tracker would show one location, and then suddenly jump hundreds of meters to another spot. The smartphone, fully charged in the morning, unexpectedly turned off. The sun was already setting, and it was becoming unusually dark in the depths of the forest. Trying to find his way back, Thomas heard a faint whisper. At first he thought it was the wind, but the sounds were too rhythmic and clear. They approached and then receded, creating the illusion that someone else was in the forest. The realization that he was not alone made his heart freeze with fear. Suddenly, a human figure appeared from behind a tree. Thomas sighed with relief, hoping for help. However, the figure stood still, its face hidden in the shadows. As Thomas approached, the figure disappeared. Looking around, he found no traces of the person, only the flickering of shadows behind the trees. As darkness fell, the forest became frightening, and Thomas realized that his chances of finding an exit that day were rapidly diminishing. He decided to set up a tent for the night. Waking up in the middle of the night from the cold, he saw that the tent was surrounded by hundreds of tiny fireflies. At first it seemed enchanting, but when the fireflies began to form strange symbols and circles around the tent, Thomas was filled with a sense of anxiety. The next morning he found an ancient doll wrapped in red thread next to his tent. It was an item he definitely had not brought with him. There was also a note in Old Japanese, the meaning of which he could only guess. In panic, Thomas packed up his things and hurried out of the forest. Exhausted and bruised, he finally reached the road, where a passing car picked him up. Several months later, as he was sorting through his photographs, he discovered the reflection of that same figure he had seen in the forest on one of the images. In the photo, the figure was looking directly into the camera, and Thomas felt he saw something deeply familiar yet terrifying in its eyes. That look reminded him of something deeply personal and forgotten, a mystery that he might never solve. Thomas tried to forget his terrifying experience in Aokigahara, but the image in the photograph continued to haunt him. Each time he looked at it, his sense of unease grew. The photograph evoked not just fear, but a deep feeling of loss and incompleteness. Since then, his nights had become restless, filled with nightmares in which the same mysterious figure beckoned him back to the forest. Deciding to unravel the mystery of this strange event, Thomas began searching for information about the legends and history of Aokigahara. In his research, he learned of many mystical stories associated with the place. However, one story caught his attention more than others. It told of a girl named Aiko who disappeared in the forest in the early 1960s and whose body was never found. According to legend, her spirit could not find peace and wandered the forest, seeking a companion to free her from her solitude. Influenced by this discovery, Thomas became convinced that it was Aiko's spirit he had seen in the photograph. An insane idea began to form in his mind to return to Aokigahara and try to make contact with Aiko. Perhaps by helping her, he could rid himself of the nightmares that haunted him and bring peace to her soul. Thomas returned to Japan, this time more prepared. He brought not only his camera but also various items that he thought might be connected to Aiko or hold significance for her. Among them was an antique doll, similar to the one he had found in the forest. Entering the forest, he felt the same eerie sensation as the first time. At night, he pitched his tent in the same spot where he had stayed before and placed the doll and other items in front of him. Thomas meditated, trying to attune himself to any signs of Aiko's presence. Around midnight, something inexplicable happened. The wind suddenly died down, and an impenetrable silence fell over the forest. Thomas felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. He slowly turned and saw a figure before him, a woman in traditional Japanese clothing, with sad eyes filled with despair. "Aiko," he quietly asked. The figure nodded, and tears filled her eyes. Thomas felt a sudden desire to help her. and in that moment, images of the girl's life, her loneliness and sorrow, her last moments in this forest flashed before his eyes. "I'm here to help you," he whispered. After these words, hundreds of fireflies took flight around them, illuminating the forest with a soft light. Aiko smiled, and her figure became translucent, dissolving into the air until she completely disappeared. Silence ensued, and Thomas felt the burden that had weighed on his soul lift. As soon as Thomas returned home, he began to feel as if his own house seemed foreign to him. He tried to adjust to normal life, but everything around him reminded him of the piece of his soul that he might have left in Aokigahara. But strange events started happening here too, far from the mysterious forest. One morning, upon waking up, Thomas found a small antique doll on his doorstep, similar to the one he had taken to Japan. Next to it was a note in Japanese, which he translated as "Remember us." At first, he thought it was some kind of prank or even a threat, but there were no signs of a break-in at home, and the security cameras recorded no visitors. In the following days, the incidents continued. Thomas heard whispers of his name at night, and objects in his house began to disappear, only to be found in the most unexpected places. He tried to find a logical explanation, even consulting a psychotherapist, but they could not rationally explain his experiences. The mystery was resolved one evening, when after another strange noise in the house, Thomas saw a window open on his computer screen with a document about a recent donation made to the preservation of Aokigahara, of which he had never heard. His own name was listed as the donor. An image of Aiko flickered on the monitor, but this time she appeared calm and was smiling. At that moment, Thomas realized that his connection with Aiko was deeper than he had thought. She had not only freed herself from her shackles, but had also become a part of his life, helping him do good where he himself could not. This understanding changed Thomas. He decided to continue his work in protecting and studying myths and legends, but now with a new purpose to uncover the mystical connection between spirits and living people, which he had personally experienced. After returning from Japan, Thomas began studying psychology and neurology, seeking to understand the reasons behind his experiences in Aokigahara. He discovered numerous scientific articles on how stress and extreme conditions can cause hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. As he delved deeper into this topic, Thomas started attending lectures and seminars, learning methods of critical thinking and scientific approaches to solving unexplained phenomena. Eventually, Thomas concluded that what he experienced in the forest was not an encounter with a spirit, but the result of his own psychological state, exacerbated by the grim atmosphere of Aokigahara and his personal fears. This realization helped him overcome his fear of the paranormal and understand that a scientific explanation can be found for many seemingly mystical events. Thomas decided to share his findings with the public to help others who experience similar fears or illusions. He began writing articles and giving interviews, discussing his experience and how a scientific approach helped him make sense of his experiences. Thomas became an active promoter of science, speaking out against superstitions and pseudoscience. Thomas's life became calmer and more meaningful. He continued his research and scientific work, increasingly convinced that many mystical events have entirely rational and explainable reasons. Gradually, he found peace of mind, finding answers to his troubling questions in science, not mysticism.